First of all, I must thank you, Mohammed, and your organization for doing this wonderful job of organizing my lecture today. And I see the audience is quite global. Poor guys in India are at 11:30 in the night and early morning in New Zealand and other places, and of course 9 o'clock in Saudi Arabia. And thank you very much for organizing this, and thank you for the participants to be part of my talk. So the idea of this talk is basically about how culture can play an important role in architecture and how one could articulate architectural practice based on the cultural principles and by understanding the very essence of culture. So I presently teach at the Faculty of Architecture at Dar al-Hikmah University in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and very soon to travel back home to New Zealand, provided my flights are on, and hopefully planning to come back to Saudi. Is a great country, I love it. So I would like to come back again. I just wanted to start with this particular definition, but in architecture, we are usually confused with the very definition of what architecture means. So many people say architecture is a creation of spaces and stuff like that. But what does this damn space mean? How do you define a space? So I was researching quite a bit since so many years, and the best definition I could find as of today is from Vedas. The Vedas are basically the traditional texts of Indian culture, and the whole of Indian culture is based on the essence of Vedas. And what does Veda tell about space is that space is that which accommodates space. So that's an amazing concept. I mean, I always wonder, what is this? And and this is what we are after in architecture. So at the end of it, it's not just the building that matters, but how the spaces that accommodate, that encompass this building is what matters. Because people live most of the time indoors, at least half of the lifetime they spend in indoors. And the spaces that they interact with have to be very, very significant. And so this definition is so important because it involves both psychological and physiological thing. I come from a country, India, called India, and it's a country where I was born and brought up. And even though I migrated to New Zealand 5 or 6 years back, but still my heart is there. But many people think India as a land of snake charmers. The Westerners usually think that it is the land of snake charmers. But of course, you see a lot of snake charmers even today in every city, every town, and every village. And it's very interesting, to make the snake dance to the tunes of this gentleman who's sitting there, probably in Rajasthan. But I can understand he's from the dress he's wearing is probably in Rajasthan, which is a North Indian state, a beautiful state. So, but it is not so. It's much more than that. What you see is the kind of tremendous mix of, you have some of the most beautiful women there. I'm not telling anything racist or whatever it is, but I think India has that cultural mix which has gone through several centuries, and the civilization is developed, and hundreds of languages and several regions. There's immense amount of spirituality around, and you could see a temple, a mosque, or a church almost in every corner of a street. And that's how the diversified culture has existed for centuries. And there are, of course, differences within us, but there's a lot of unity in diversity, and we live as a one country. There's a colorful country. Not just about the people, but it's also about the craft. The picture, what you see here, is the pottery from Khurja, a place called Khurja in Uttar Pradesh. very close to Delhi. And this is supposed to have come from Syria. Fortunately, the technique of making this pottery is still alive. And it's so amazing that this particular place called Khurja is a place where the land was was like unfit for any kind of agriculture, so people never settled there actually. But within that kind of the negative aspect of the land, you could see that people made use of that earth there to make these potteries and make this beautiful Syrian pottery, which is still existing, which is worth, any one of you guys want to go, you should go. Even I'm planning to go because I'm very keen on pottery. So this is just one aspect of it. I'm going to show something very different which has connection to this country. Now, if you look at the sword, this is the sword which Prince Faisal, when he visited United Kingdom in 1919, he actually gifted this to George VI. And while presenting this, he specifically mentioned that this sword came from India. I mean, look at the workmanship. Man, India was a country which had extraordinary craftsmen, extraordinary craftsmanship, and extraordinary techniques. And the kind of mixture of culture brought us to this stage. So what is happening today? What will happen in the future? We don't have any predictions as such, but the culture still exists. We live as a part of the culture. And I was born and brought up as a part of this culture, wonderful culture, and I love to be there, I love to be part of that community there. I come from a small town called Vellore. As you see the Google map of this town, what you see here is the fort in the middle, and my house is somewhere there. And that's the river that is very dry now, unfortunately, and there's a big mountain. So it's actually a valley town. So this is a town. If you see a greater picture, this is the picture of the fort, which is right in the middle of the city, Vellore. Vellore is a town which is in South India, a historic town which was ruled by different kings during different period, occupied by the British. And then it is the headquarters of the district where I have my ancestral properties and all this stuff. Now, this is a beautiful fort, one of its kind, ground fort in India, which is still intact. The Archaeological Survey of India is doing a wonderful job. And this fort has got a church, a mosque, and a temple. And the temple was a wonderful one. And so you could see how the entire settlements is around the fort, and so beautiful it is. And every corner of the fort has those bastions, which where the defensive mechanisms built within the fort architecture. And then, of course, there's a major defensive mechanism is the moat around it, where I was told there used to be 10,000 crocodiles used to swarm the moat, not allowing any intruder into the fort, protecting the temple, the palace, or whatever it is. I don't see any palace today now, but probably there was a palace. There could have been a palace, but I see some British buildings which still survive as some government structures. So this particular fort was a big influence for me as a child. So my house was somewhere here. If I can get to annotate, so my house was somewhere there, here. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so there it is. So my house was somewhere there. So I used to just walk straight up here and go through the Chor Diddi. We call it as a secret passage, and then we used to play around here. And then there was no idol in the temple, so I used to go inside the temple. There's a wonderfully carved sculptures made of stone. I mean, the kind of artisans that would have made those beautiful pillars. It's still like every corner of the temple is like a part of my thought process even today. So that was the first major influence as a child. So what I did is that when I joined architecture, that was actually by accident. So I never knew how the fort, the temple inside was connected to architecture in some form, but I later realized that I would land up doing some research work. So when I was in the third year architecture, I actually documented the whole fort. And the primary focus was of course, the temple, the church, and the mosque, and each of them built in different periods of history. And of course, these the two structures. What you see here is wait a minute. Let me get hold of this one. Yeah. So the structures, what you see here is are called the palaces, but they are not actually palaces. These are the prison cells built by the British. If you happen to, if you know Tipu Sultan, and after Tipu Sultan's was killed in the last war of Mysore in 1799, his family was brought here and imprisoned, and whatever, the rest is history. So we don't go into the darker part of it in this lecture. So this is the fort which I documented when I was in third year architecture, where I won a national award. And that was the beginning of my looking into the cultural aspects of my own hometown. And then what happened is that there was not just the fort, but there were other Islamic monuments around the fort, which were built during the Islamic period, which was the Muslim rule. And I did a complete documentation. Of course, I did it along with my two of my colleagues who are practicing in a city called Coimbatore, and they are my great friends, and we joined together and collaborated on this competition. I mean, in this Louis Kahn project, which was initiated by Balakrishna Doshi, BB Doshi, as we call him, who was a Pulitzer Prize winner last year. And I'm really grateful to him because I won this prize 3 times in 1980, 81, and 82. Of course, 82 was the first national award, all India level. So it's a big competition there. So these are hand-drawn sketches. And I believe very much that every architect should know his own roots. So he should know where he comes from and what his purpose is. So the kind of work which I did without realizing what I'm doing as a student became the basis of my further research work. So you could see the plans. These are very old drawings. Fortunately, I still have preserved them, but not in the right format. But these are all hand-drawn. And so you could see that there are some imperfections in these drawings. So it's okay, because we were still students and we are trying to, we never used computers or whatever it is. So bear with me that there was some imperfection, but it's a hand-drawn. That's the beauty of these drawings. So this is a tomb of one of the relatives of Tipu Sultan, where you have the main sanctum and the cloisters around it for people to read, recite the holy book and all that stuff. So there are a variety of monuments. What you see here is a combination of Indian Hindu architecture, and then you have the superimposition of the Islamic forms there. You have the onion domes and all these things. If you look at the domes represent a lot of things which came from Persia. And imagine the kind of artisans, the workmanship, people who are involved in working on it. So there's a combination of this. This is supposed to be the tomb of a lady who got converted to Islam, Diwan Purnaya's daughter, but there's no 100% proof on that, but still that's what is written on this tomb. So I wanted to show this slide. I like what David Ajayi was trying to tell here about architecture. He says architecture is about where we are, how we are, and where we want to go. And that's very absolutely true for every architecture student. When he joins architecture, he has a big thing that he says he wants to do a tall building, he wants to do a shopping complex, he wants to do a big villa, or he wants to do a whole lot of things, you know. And because, you know, architects make a lot of money, and that, of course, everybody wants to make a lot of money, but I think there must be some the inner conscious awakening within every architect to understand how important it is for us to understand the very basis of our roots and how we want to do it, how do we want to interpret it, and how we can communicate that idea and message to people around. Coming back to the background of architecture, where we were studying, like most of the time, the architecture schools make a lot of mistakes. I ran a school of architecture. I made a lot of mistakes. I am doing a lot of mistakes. I'm trying to realize, okay, this is not the way we should do. But when we look at the modern architecture, which were part and parcel of our lives, this is about Corbusier's project in India, one of the largest projects he ever executed. And he was given a blank check by the new prime minister then. So he said, let this be a new town. When he did Chandigarh, he said, let this be a new town, symbolic of freedom of India, unfettered by the traditions of the past, an expression of the nation's faith in the future. This is a wonderful expression by our first prime minister of independence after 1947. And this was a blank check for Cobb, because this is what he was expecting. So, but Cobb went around and he came out with different kind of things, what he saw, differently interpreted. But this became the basis of our inspiration to many of the schools in India, schools of architecture in India, and many first generation Indian architects. I'm going to show you that. And then, of course, we had another great architect, a very sensitive architect. I love this architect. His name is Louis Kahn, who did the Indian Institute of Management. And if I have to tell you that you need to do a pilgrimage to modern architecture, I think you should go to IIM, because there actually he is alive. I mean, he's there, he's present, he speaks, and he talks to you. Every wall you touch, you could feel Lou is already there. So this is another wonderful architecture, very different from what Cobb did. Cobb brought in exposed concrete, which was completely devastating for the climatic conditions of Chandigarh. But what Lou did was different. He made the bricks do the job. He made the bricks to speak the language, create those spaces, and wonderful study of light and shade. Then, of course, we had first generation modern architects coming to India. You have Habib Rahman and, of course, Kanvinde, who were taught by Walter Gropius. You know, if Walter Gropius is teaching you, you know what would be the outcome. So you could see the sample of the buildings that one would see from these people. Then we had the continuity of this great tradition, great modernist is Charles Correa, another wonderful architect, great sensitive architect, and of course, he is no more now. And then we have the living legends, B.V. Doshi and Raj Riwal. Raj Riwal is one of the architects who understood very early in his practice the essence of Indian culture when he did the Asian village, so he could work with that. And then P.V. Doshi, initially, he did follow what Cobb did, but I think he later realized with his work in IIM Bangalore and many other works that followed, he changed his thought process. And the same thing goes with Charles Correa. But if you look at the works which he did much later, the works, what you see here is the Kanchenjunga apartment and the Vishweshwaraya Tower in Bangalore. And then the works which he did in the Jawaharlal Kala Kendra and then the Bhopal Assembly was a complete shift in philosophy. So this was a thing that was happening around India in the early 80s, late 70s, 80s, and all that stuff, and still goes on. So this was the time I was graduating from architecture school. So what do you think you can expect from an architecture student who's surrounded by these kind of things? So I exactly did what things were happening. Probably it was wrong. I didn't even question. These are my final year thesis drawings, which were hand-drawn. These are temporary techniques which were hand-drawn. Luckily, I still have preserved these drawings. So I did a science center and a museum and all that stuff together. You could see the kind of influence I had as a student of architecture. Still, even though I did my research work in my temple and the other fort and all the stuff that was there in the background, but this architecture, the ideology of modernism was just overpowering me into when I was a student of architecture. So this is what was the outcome. So you could see this drawing was done by my friend as a big tribute to me, as a contribution to my work. Perspective drawn, this wonderful cube. When I look at Casa Musica by Rem Koolhaas, which came 20, 30 years after, I could see that this was done in 1982. So probably 20, 30 years before even Rem thought about this kind of stuff. And I had a big difficulty in convincing my teachers, and the teachers were totally against me. They said they're going to fail me and all this stuff. Luckily, I had a good external teacher who gave me a gold medal. So I was happy with that. Okay, then after my graduation, I did a short stint as a teacher, and then I went to England on a scholarship from the Aga Khan Foundation. I'm thankful to them. They gave me a full scholarship to go there and study architecture at the Bartlett, one of the best schools today. And then the first thing I lined up is showing the National Theatre, and had to listen to this wonderful lecture by Dennis Lasden, one of the finest brutalist architect Britain has ever produced. And I love this building. And every time I go, I feel that this is a pilgrimage for me to go and see this building, touch this building, feel this building. And I could see everything that I was doing as a graduate student is present there and in a built form, and I loved it. So as I was in London, I came across this book called Tantra, The Art of Tantra by Philip Rossen. And it's a small book, and I picked up this book, and then I was reading to it, and then everything opened up. So I was like shocked to see that there is so much to learn in the Indian culture, which I have not been even taught about, or even made to think about, or made to see, or made to realize. So we do history of architecture by Percy Brown or somebody else, but we do it for the sake of the examinations. We need to pass the semester, so we do that chapters, copy them or whatever, like repeat the whole thing, do some sketches and get out of it. But some students take it seriously. But I think I did the same thing. So, but when I read this book, I still have this book with me. It opened up. So I said, oh my God, this is different. So, and all the time I was thinking of architectures, I need to interpret this into architecture. That was all in my background. And then when I just to show you this slide, that later on my further research into it, I found the Tantric Way by Madhu Khanna and Najib Mukherjee. I've seen a lot of books written by them. I've seen this wonderful interpretation of the concept and idea. Then, of course, Syed Haider Raza. I don't know how many of you remember him, one of the internationally acclaimed Indian artist who lived most of his life in Paris. He worked on what is called as a bindu. Bindu is nothing but a dot, which every Hindu woman wears it on her forehead, signifying creativity. So bindu is the source of energy, source of creativity, source or the center of the whole thing that revolves around you. So his idea was, he made hundreds and thousands of drawings, just those circles, and he sold them for millions of dollars. And I could see that in the year 1986, Charles Correa, as a wonderful architect I have ever met. I met him a few times, but we never discussed this philosophy. So he was trying his Bhopal Assembly Building in 1986 to 91. Probably would have started the conceptual drawings much earlier than that. I didn't even know, I haven't seen that building till the time when, till I was influenced by Philip Rossen's building. So when I came back to India, I was advised to go back to India because there was a new prime minister, there's a big thing happening. So I came back to India, and I entered into this wonderful competition with two of my friends who were my research associates who practice in Coimbatore. So this is the competition which I did. What you see at the bottom is the Indira Gandhi National Center for Art. So a lot of research work done on it, and to try and understand the essence of what Indian architecture is, Indian culture is, and how this needs to be interpreted. So the other book that was, it's actually a catalog. It gives you a complete history of Indian modernism. It also talks about the future of India, because in the 80s, when I just graduated, people were questioning about Indian modernism. And then I think there was already this kind of postmodernistic thought process, which almost matured in the US. And we had the Indian architects and the pioneers thinking that it got to look at the roots, or the cultural roots. So I'll show you some of the statements later on. So then this catalog was a great influence. You could see a mandala there, and the red dot, which is a bindu, which was deep into my mind, and that prompted me, or that encouraged me to do further research. So Charles Correa says that architecture is not created in a vacuum. It is the compulsive expression of beliefs central to our lives. When we look at the architectural heritage of India, we find an incredibly rich reservoir of mythic images and beliefs, all coexisting in an easy and natural pluralism. Each is like a transparent overlay, starting with the model of the cosmos right down to its century. And it is their presence in our lives that create a pluralistic society of India today. It's very true, very apt, and very important for every architecture student to understand this, how plural India is. The beauty of India is all about plurality. And then earlier I showed you the first slides, it's all about plurality, and the color, the mix, the culture, everything is part and parcel of it. As an architect, we look at how architecture can represent that. So in the 80s, modernism in its Corbusian avatar was recognized as being inadequate to address the reality. That's what I was trying to say. The ancient Indian past could not be ignored in architecture because the ancient past is also its living present. The idea is that the postmodernism, complexity and contradiction, followed by Michael Graves and Peter Eisenman and Robert Stern and all those guys who, to some extent, James Stirling, later works of James Stirling in the UK. So they were all questioning the very basis of architecture, and they were evolving something else. And then that was a time that Indian pioneers of this were also thinking in those terms. Raj Rival did a Nehru Library in 1977. He was the first to think in those lines. Then Charles Correa came with his two projects, and B.V. Doshi did the Gandhinagar Extension project based on that philosophy. Unfortunately, it never got realized. So this is what is about. It's about the Yantric art. The Tantric art talks about yantra, which is an instrument, which is nothing but talks about the cosmic physical reality of human existence. This is about the relationship between microcosm and the macrocosm, which is the microcosm is the human body, and the macrocosm is the space and the universe that surrounds him. So this is like the central is a dot, which is the source of creativity. Then you have the triangles, which pointing up and down, this with a mix of male and female principles. And then you have the unfolding lotus, which is the meaning that the universe is unfolding, which is the reality today, the scientific approval. And this sketch is not now, it's thousands of years back. Of course, it talks about evolution of life and involution of life. So when you unpack this, what I did was that I tried to unpack this whole thing. I said I wanted to see what is happening at different levels. So I unpacked it at seven different stages. So I see a dot, I see a triangle, I see two triangles, and then multiple triangles, then there's a circle, and then there's a square. So these are in every way the kind of architectural principles taught by Kandinsky and what all the Bauhaus. Still we try to follow Bauhaus principles, which is questionable, which is what may help to some extent to understand how to do a good building, but it's not really doing us to understand how the spaces that dictate these buildings need to be culturally sensitive. So I sort of unpacked it, and I tried to see how this unpacking can help us in creating an architecture. I came across a statement, a quote by my professor, Leon von Schaik. He's a professor at RMIT. He was my guide in my PhD, and he was talking about spatial intelligence. He says that it's one of the 7 acknowledged human capabilities and is a result of millions of years of evolution. So whether you take it as a pottery, whether you take it as architecture, whether you take it as even food, clothing, fashion, everything takes several hundreds and thousands of years to evolve. But it is underrated human capability because people use it unconsciously all the time. They navigate their way through their daily life. So we actually, for example, talk about the courtyard. So we are experiencing the courtyard every day. It was sad to see that how typically a building in Balad in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, which is interwoven with courtyards. And so wonderful to walk along the shaded streets, beautiful architecture, which is the spatial intelligence, which is thousands of years back. We of course know Jeddah was one of the very early founding cities of this nation. But what is happening today? If you come to many of the modern areas where you see houses built with certain planning principles, where people have erected barricades on the side so that a neighbor cannot see another neighbor, or the heat reflection from these barricades are terrible. So you create something and then create a problem, and you find the solution is not. But the solution is there with thousands of years back where our forefathers did it. This is the intelligence which we are trying to forget, but we document, we don't implement it. So when I started my practice, my major practice was in India, and presently I have a studio in New Zealand where my son also joins me in architectural practice. I've done projects all over the place. The red dots, you see that the projects where I did in Middle East, and then I did in Bosnia, then a bit of Paris, France. We did a beautiful urban design project in Paris, Maison Salfo Charenton, Paris. And then in Singapore, and then Mauritius, we did a big Urdu Institute. In New Zealand, since about 6 years, we're doing smaller works, but we are doing some works which I can't show it to you because of some privacy reasons. So this is how my practice spread, but I spend my time between New Zealand and India. And of course, I've been here in Saudi Arabia for quite some time. So when I did this first project, this is how the unpacking was done. I'm going to rush the slides because it's going to take how much time? It's 9:41. So another 10-15 minutes. So, so you could see that this is the first model, this is the first project I did in India when I came back in 1985. So I did this competition project. We didn't win the project. The project went to Ralph Lerner, who was a postmodernist and a prodigy of Michael Graves. But unfortunately, then even Ralph Lerner's project never got built. He was a frustrated man. And this project was, he didn't win the competition, but what it did to me is something which is more than the competition winning could have done. I'm happy that it did not win the competition because they wouldn't have built it because there was no funding. And at least this project lives as my dream. This is a huge cultural project called the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts. And I followed this whole idea of how unpacking this whole yantric form into architectural realization. It's an amazing project. There's a lecture on its own on this project, how this can happen. This is good for students, how we can dissect the forms. So these are some of the drawings I found. We had an excellent artist in my group who used to do a beautiful sketching. And of course, I was leading the team, and the 2 guys were behind me. They were working for me, and we worked together. They did a wonderful job. So you could see that how a dot becomes a line becomes a triangle becomes a square, and the square becomes a swastik, which is nothing but is a shape of a sun and energy, and it comes back. So it's the idea of evolution of life and involution of life. So you need to understand that we come from somewhere, we go somewhere. So the idea is that we have a time frame. We travel here as tourists in this planet, and we live here for a specific period of time. And that's the time that we need to change. We need to contribute to the community, need to be with them, need to help each other, talk positive things, and then, make people happy. And it has everything to do with architecture. You can interpret these principles anyway. But one mistake we did in this project is the architectural interpretation of it, the over symbolism that was involved in it. So there were and absolutely too much of symbolism in this project. So unfortunately, in my practice after that, I sort of stopped it out. After the failure of this competition, I started my own practice. These are my very early works. Some of them are beautiful houses which still exist even today. The one on the right, what you see here, is my own office and studio where my brother lives, and my studio on top. And you have this, the top wind catchers on top. And then these are some of my clients' projects. And then some commercial projects like office buildings. I was a little bit mixed with high technology and stuff like that. But there's always an 80-20 ratio. There's always 20% that an architect is really looks at it, which are closer to God. But 80% of that work, he does it for the heck of it. I mean, every architect does it. So, but even then, if you have a deeper sense of what you are doing, you will try and bring out something good. So these are some of the competitions project, which some of them won and some of them lost. These are the works, and I was like, my office was like a workshop in those days, and it was like model making machine. This is a huge project which I did along with my friends in the UK, in Bangalore. It's called The Gardens. It's about 2.1 million square feet residential building. And the wonderful thing about the building is that it had 588 trees, which nearly about 500 trees were saved, but still a commercial client from Dubai, he wanted 1,000 apartments. So we gave him the 2,000 apartments, and we did this building with absolutely no straight lines. It was all curved to basements, 1,500 car parkings. And the project is about, it was completed in 2011-10, and it was supposed to be the first green housing project from a private sector in India. And it's a wonderful project. If you happen to go to Bangalore, you must see this project. And all the trees, we have the lower canopy living and then the upper canopy living. And then you have this, it's a very profitable project for my client who made a lot of money out of it. But of course, I don't own any apartment there. So there's a lot of high technology in this project. You have the Z bridge and all that stuff. We had a big problem with my structural engineer. We fought with him. And then finally, he had to come down. I know the story of Sydney Opera, so I knew how to control the structural engineers. So I was able to tackle them well. Okay, so this is how you see it in Google. So I think this is a very old photograph. Probably you'll see a much better picture if you happen to get across. So I wanted to tell about what Mimar Sinan. I don't know how many of you know him. He's one of the most wonderful architects of the Ottoman period. And he lived nearly 99 years, and he built a lot of caravanserais. The best one he did was the Suleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul. And I've been there, and I've been to many of his buildings. And he's a wonderful architect. I adore this gentleman. And he said a good architect is full of piety. So the meaning of piety is all about humility, religiosity, and in the sense, if it's something about goodness. So if an architect is good, if an architect can see good, hear good, and talk good, and if he can take the good cultural principles within him, and his architecture reflects exactly what he is. So I believed in that. So I want to show this one particular project. It's a mosque project in Erode, which was nominated for the Aga Khan Award. Nominated for Aga Khan Award in 1995. It's an old project, it's a wonderful project, closer to my heart, because the client gave me full freedom to do whatever I want. So, so this was based on these two interlocking squares of Islamic geometry, and how I interpreted that interlocking of squares into cosmic principle, and superimposed these two cultural principles, both the Islamic and the other Indian cultural principles, into it, and trying to bring it around with the circular tower, which became rising up, pointing up at the heaven, pointing at the sky above. So what we call Akasha in Sanskrit. So the tower actually sort of points towards Akasha, that is the sky above. So it's a very simple mosque, and I'm lucky my client has not touched it since about 25 years now. It's exactly the same even today. I hope so. Some of my friends visited there recently. An Australian friend visited. He loved it, and he said nothing has changed. So yeah, that's this interior space of it. And then when I break this thing into three-dimensional forms, you could see how the red square rotates and how the geometry plays a very important role, bring that sacredness into the spatial aspect of it. So here you see two cultural essences mixing together, and then you feel those the greatness of this lovely space that is created. So that's the top view of the mosque. And then if you split it out, that's a cross-sectional drawing of the mosque. These drawings are credited to my nephew, who is in Sydney, who was kind enough to make this reconstruction of this existing building. And I'm very grateful to this guy. So we did a lot of restudy of this building and its proportions, its architectural spatial interpretation, and how it relates with the community. And then we made models and stuff like that. So this is how, it's a very old photograph, and this building was under construction. And that's the interior, very simple. It's not a very expensive mosque, but it's a very simple mosque, but it has a philosophical background to it. That's the minaret, and that's how the mosque looks. This is also an old photograph. I see some kind of temporary structures that have come around it. So, but this is almost intact. The idea of this is to how to even interpret the so-called the Muslim architectural characteristics to it. So like, for example, arch is there, but it's not there. So it's broken and split up. So it's conveying a meaning to it. So that's how it looks at night. So then it's about my own house in Bangalore, which was built in 2004. It's very close to my heart. It's a very small house, but of course my client was my wife. That was a tough thing to do, because if you have a wife who's a client of yours, and then, you know, it's a very tough thing, but it's also good. But she listened to me. Whatever I had to do, she listened to me. So finally, we came out with a house which is based on certain principles, which I was talking about, how the 5 elements of nature is integrated into the whole planning thought process. And then this is how the split of it, I'm rushing it up a little bit. So this is the cross section of the drawing. And then of course, how light plays into it. And that's the house. So when this house was built, I had a big problem with the authorities. They thought it was a warehouse. It was a factory. So because it doesn't look like a house, it's a more kind of a indoor focused house with a central lighting shaft. In the middle, we call it a Kalyana Kudam in our traditional language, which is which brings in light and air and ventilation into it. We call it stack effect, Venturi effect in Western textbooks. So you will see a small clinic for my wife, and the garage. You actually enter the garage. When a person comes to this house, you won't even know where the calling bell is. He suffers a lot. And that was the whole idea. We don't want people to disturb us. So it's like a big square block, stands like an elephant. It's like a warehouse. People disliked it in the beginning, but they started liking it because many people started visiting them. So I have a client who works for an American company who's enjoying now, who's a tenant man. So this is how the house, the facade of the house is weathering out a little bit. It's like an elephant skin, tamed elephant skin, which is weathering out. I love the way it is done. So you could see that the difference between these 2 windows here, now it's been got louvers because the opposite fellow was peeping into my bedroom. Then there's another school project which I wanted to tell you is about how miraculously we got this concept done. We never started off with it. When we started working on the site, we found the very essence of, there's an Iqra school, Iqra Trust, which was building a school, and lucky for them, we could get hold of a calligraphic interpretation of that spaces there. And of course, courtyard as the Brahmasthana, or the breathing space, became very effective, and the lines represented the calligraphic interpretation of the creator. And this school is almost finished, but the third phase is going on, alhamdulillah. And then you could see how the school with the interlocking with the courtyard, and that's how it looks in the drawing. And I'll show you, this is how the part of the interiors look. That's how light comes into one of the corridors. That's how it looks. You could see the influence of my brutalist idea in architecture. It still survives in me. It's not just going out. I can't help it. If you ask me to do a building in Timbuktu, I probably might do it. Would do the same way. That's because I'm changing. I'm trying to change, but that's very difficult to change. So that's how it looks. It's a beautiful school. If you happen to be in Bangalore, you must visit that. And that's the entrance part of the school. And that's the model of the school. And this was done by my student, Akash, who went into a different field of architecture. I mean, not architecture, he became a chef. I mean, he's become a food designer, sorry. So he's become a food designer from architecture, but he's still doing architecture. I always believe that. I think he took it very seriously when I said a good architect is a good cook. So I think he took it very seriously. So he went into food design and he became a food designer. So that's the school right now. So you see that the phase 3 is still under construction here. Probably it will go up a little bit due to some financial issues, but overall, it's like a solid piece sitting there, trying to represent the kind of medieval architectural essence with the cultural principles of Ikhra trust into this architecture. Then the last project, which I'm going to show you, is a speculative project for the Tamil museums. You know, the Tamils have been massacred, have been harassed by the Sri Lankans for a long time. In 2009, the Sri Lankan war came to an end. Hundreds and thousands of people died. So I proposed a museum which will float in Bay of Bengal as a remembrance for these great people who fought for their freedom, and the very place where Farah, the ship, was stranded, and which supplied them food and material. They even flew an helicopter using the machines of this ship, merchant ship. But of course, now the merchant ship does not, just fit small bits and pieces are there. So I selected that site. This was a site which was like reinterpretation of the agency, a project, how I could soften my own idea of how to bring down the aesthetics from pure symbolism to make it as minimal as possible, but at the same time, it should become more and more meaningful. So that's the project, which is right into the sea. It's about nearly about 2 kilometers from the main road to Jaffna, and then you have it to the sea. Several models and several interpretations were made, several drawings to understand how things should go, and you could see that how this particular sketch is dissecting the whole thing. Like you can take out bits and pieces. It's like manufacturing architecture, bringing it here, putting it in place, but you can take it back. So each and every element of this project has its own meaning, communicates with the people who are around it. So it tells the whole story. So these are the different process models. We even negotiated with a high-tech screen all around, but most of the time, it was finally decided to keep the skin as much perforated as possible because of the climatic condition and the cost implications. So this is how the model looks at night, and it's how the cube will be floating in the sea. You could see that this will actually be, if this is built, it could probably seen from space station. Inshallah, if it is built, but if the political situation and the Tamil people are interested, they could probably think in terms of building this in the sea. This is how it looks, the whole process of going to the museum that is at the end of it. So I'm coming back. This is my last slide. Sorry to bother you. I think I almost, on hearing, I took about 55 minutes. So I want to leave you with this particular thought process by David Ajayi, is one of the wonderful British architects. I love his work, though. I love the way he culturally interprets his works. He says architecture is about where we go, where we are, how we are, and where we want to go. And it's very true, my dear friends, and it's true that as long as we understand who we are, what we want to do, and what is the future, and the way the COVID situation has taught us, we must try and understand the sensitivity of environment, sensitivity of architecture, sensitivity of people, sensitivity of culture, sensitivity of everything that is surrounding us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jaffer. I already sent to everyone if they have questions to share it now. It was very interesting because I always wanted for myself to learn more about architecture in India, because it's not very far from here, but we don't know about it, and it's a very fabulous history you've given us today.
Thank you very much, and I think it was wonderful to have shared my thoughts with some of your audience here, and it's
thank you.
I know some of the countries have a difficult time zones, but I see a lot of my students there in the panel, I mean, in the participants.
So we have some questions now. This is from Razan. How the architectural identity is affected by different periods of architecture, and how people in general respond to these changes?
It's a pretty tough question. I'm sure this is Razan Masri, which was my student. She's doing a wonderful project in Syria. She's doing a school. I'm sure she's the one who's asked this question, Razan Masri. So I think it's all about like every culture, every part of civilization. People have done architecture, people have built environment, people have interpreted their ideas and thought processes in their own way. But you see that the thread that continues to the next generation, to the next civilization, or the goodness of the civilization that carries forward. Like, for example, a whole lot of things that the Greeks learned from Egyptians, and a whole lot of things the Romans learned from the Greeks, and how the Roman architecture spread around the world. I mean, you still find the Corinthian columns, you still find Doric columns, still find a whole lot of columns which revolve around our architecture, but which may not be meaningless at all. So it's important for an architecture student or an architect to understand the very basic roots of history, roots where she or he comes from. I'm not asking you to go and read the world history. I think if you're positioned in Saudi Arabia, I think it's important for you to understand how important it is to you ground yourself with the root, the philosophy of architecture there, philosophy of environment here, how people culturally existed here. Like, for example, I used to very often talk to my students about Al-Habla, people of the rope, somewhere in southwestern part of Saudi Arabia. Imagine, that kind of thing doesn't exist now, but when you take the rope, go down, you still have those ruins of those villages. And how could they survive? I was told that even an 80-year-old woman could climb in 5 minutes, a distance of about maybe 50, 60 meters up to the top. So these are the things we might have lost, but there's still opportunity to revive that. And I think it's important for the modern architects, for the budding architects to interpret them in the right direction. And for that interpretation, you need to do a lot of research, and I'm sure this research will be of great use to you. I hope I answered this.
Okay, this question from Huma. Do you think cultural essence is one thing which binds the architecture of the whole world together in one thread?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Okay, do you think cultural essence is one thing which binds the architecture of the whole world together in one thread?
Well, I think I can give one example. For example, courtyards exist, isn't it? So the courtyards exist almost everywhere in the world. Maybe not in the Western world, but it's most often in the hot and arid regions like the Arabian desert, Arabian society, or Persian, whatever it is. So the courtyards exist. They existed hundreds and thousands of years. But how do you make people realize that? So if you come back to South India, you still have courtyards. So you have large courtyards where there's hot and humid regions, and you have smaller courtyards and hot and arid regions of Rajasthan. So you have a very similar situation here because there's not much of rainfall in Saudi Arabia. But in India, it has different climatic zones. In South, there's a huge rainfall region. In Kerala, you can find large courtyards. The idea is that these courtyards became part of culture. How did it become culture? It became part of space that would be worshipped. You understand? So it became a place where the very essence of spiritual existence, you know. So that's why people, like, they were, I read you the statement of Professor Leon von Schaik. They were actually doing it without actually not knowing what to do. So this thread of culture keeps spreading. I mean, if you ask me to design a building, if I had the right kind of client, I'll definitely have a courtyard in the middle in a hot place like my hometown. Or I'll have a wind catcher. I'll do something like that. I'll have because it's a dry climate, I'll use water to try to cool down. So a whole lot of things I'll do. There are many wonderful architects in South India who are doing wonderful work. So what I feel is that this cultural thread has a connection, but only thing is that you need to understand how to interpret it, how to reinterpret it, how to suit and contextualize with your design and your client's perception. Sometimes clients are very adamant. Lucky for me, I had a lot of women clients, wonderful clients, and they listened to me a lot, and we did wonderful work together. So, I could give a lecture and talk to them about it. So they would accept it. So it's important for you how, like, if you're coming from anywhere in North India, I think first and foremost is that you need to understand where you come from, what your roots are, and how you want to see. I mean, of course, it might be difficult to find out what is lost and what is gone, but if you do research, but definitely you can find out what is there and pick out the essence of it. Like for me, I went through 30 years of understanding the whole idea of how this whole graphic image of yantra can be interpreted into architecture, and how I softened it and interpreted it into architecture in my own way.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions here. This is from Synthirville. He says, Indian architecture of the past is known for its timeless character. Would employing techniques to retain that unique culture character in current times be meaningful for prosperity and sustaining culture?
Absolutely. I believe that. I think that's why we call it as the architectural intelligence or the spatial intelligence. I think this is something like something which we need to understand very, very deeply. And there are monuments, there are buildings which are wonders, both in India and abroad, anywhere you take. And I think, how did they do it? I mean, how did they build it? And how did they try to interpret the cultural essence into these buildings? I think it's still possible, but I think technology is a tool which can be used very effectively in trying to do it. So if we can use it not just for the heck of technology, but to understand how technology can be adapted to the cultural principles, and that is possible. I'm talking about a very broader principles, which is rational and it can be interpreted anywhere. I'm not looking at symbolism. I'm against ornamentation, but I'm not looking at symbolism. So I'm looking at how the very essence of this culture can be interpreted, but it's very difficult. I mean, I don't know, this must be Sendil who was asking a question. So it's very difficult to understand, but I'm sure as you go deeper and deeper into it, you can understand the very spirit behind it.
Okay, we have two more questions. This is from Gada. If we would like to design spaces that are appropriate to the culture principles and meet all current globalization forces, where do we start?
Sorry, who's this person?
غادة. غادة.
Okay.
Her name. Okay.
Okay. Can you read that question again to me,
Okay.
please?
If we would like to design spaces that appropriate to the culture principles amid all the current globalization forces, where do we start?
This is a very interesting question, and we're talking about globalization. We're talking about, what can I say, corporate greed. We're talking about a whole lot of things that is happening around us. It's a very difficult question, but I think as architects, we are the people who can influence things, and architects have influenced societies, have influenced architecture, and have influenced the people in power. And I think it's so important for us to first of all understand what we want to do. I mean, if I don't know my own history, it's very difficult for me to interpret that history or talk to anybody else. But that definitely, whatever we would like to do, understand.
Let me interrupt you, because there is the last question actually is part of that. It's from another person, from Asil, how globalization has influenced culture and architecture, and how can we make this influence positive?
Yeah, I think the last in 20th century, we have had a tremendous amount of economic development globally, and this has impacted our lives. So what was 50 years back in Saudi Arabia is not the same thing now. But I'm not asking you to go and stay in rooms which are not air conditioned, but it's very different now, the different culture now. So what I feel is that it's a very tricky situation. We have to reorient ourselves. Like, for example, the present COVID situation has actually rethought our financial stuff around the world. And I think even architecture is changing. It's time that we think that the principles, the basic principles come into play. Like, for example, we have seen cities which had clogged skylines have been cleared in the last 2 months. Rivers which are become much more cleaner and beautiful. So we could see the skyline of the cities and all that stuff. So you know, small little things like China has taken a decision to stop high-rise buildings for whatever reason. What would be the impact of it? I'm not against that. I'm not telling you not to build high-rise building, but build it responsibly. That's what is more important. But people are building it. They say it's responsible. They have the data. They have the information. But does it really interpret the kind of an essence that we are looking at? So it's a very difficult thing. So if you have a practical project, I think it's important for you to look at the more local ideas. Many architects do it. Kengo Kuma from Japan does it. Many sensitive architects like Peter Zumthor does it. So I think it's important for us to, in the midst of globalization, still we can make a point.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jaffer. One last thing, what is your advice for the young architects?
Okay, so I think the first and foremost advice I would like to think, the world around you is not as you would expect. There's a lot of things that is happening around you. I think if I go back to what Mimar Sinan said, a good architect is the architect who has full of piety. I think we have to be truthful, not only truthful to us, but truthful to architecture, truthful to environment, truthful to our clients. And your architecture should be your inner reflection. And if you don't have the inner consciousness or the inner compassion to do something good, then your architecture will very badly suffer. So what I want the younger architects to do is to build that compassion, build that character within them, which can automatically, without even thinking, your hands and when you start drawing, it will go to it. Your minds will work the way your heart wants it to work. So I think it's basically, I want the young architects to build morality, a good I'm not telling you you're not moral, build good morality and good character, and that character will represent good architecture. And that's my advice.
Thank you, Doctor. Again, thank you for everyone who's been with us tonight. And we can wrap now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, wonderful, and thank you for all the participants who have participated here. I hope it was useful, and thank you very much, Mohammed, for organizing this lecture. It was wonderful meeting you, and inshallah we'll meet up again soon.
Inshallah. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Mashallah.